very excited right now to be joined by my next guest, author Stan Carpenter. He has published 4 books to date, one of them being Alternate History, which I am, of course, a huge fan of. Stan, first off, thank you so much for joining me. It is great to talk to you today.
Max, it's a great honor and a pleasure to be here. And on behalf of all the authors at the Rhode Island Authors Association, thank you for this. Is wonderful to allow us to get out in the public and talk about what we do.
Excellent. So let us start with your alternate history title, The Linden Tree.
The Linden Tree.
So this book basically kicks off with Japan pausing their attack on Pearl Harbor.
Right.
U.S. does not enter the war, and everything works out fine. Not quite.
Right.
But give us a quick run through of what basically happens as a result of this.
Right. Well, the scenario essentially is a U.S. submarine on just routine patrol, as they were, discovered the day before what's going to be the Pearl Harbor attack, so this would be 6 December 1941, actually discovers the Kita Butai, which is the mobile strike force, the Japanese carrier force heading towards Pearl Harbor. At first, the commanding officer sets up for an attack, and just before they're to launch torpedoes, it occurs to him that we may get one of these carriers, but they're going to get us, and they'll still go on to Pearl Harbor. So rather than actually attack, they pull back, they go into what's called tattletale. My 30 years in the U.S. by God Navy, I still have some terms, but tattletale is basically where you're trailing behind, keeping an eye on and reporting back. So they report back to Sink Pack Fleet in Pearl Harbor, which then allows the fleet to sortie and get out. And the Japanese apologize. We were just conducting a usual exercise, and we apologize, and so on and so forth. What that sets up is, since the United States is not engaged in the war, at least not yet, Germany does not declare on the United States, and so Germany is at that point focused on, as they were, on Great Britain, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union, without American interference. And the subplot here, which is going on, is the German nuclear weapons development program, which, if you know anything about that historically, it really didn't go anywhere. They were attempting it, but they never really developed the capability to generate an atomic weapon or nuclear weapon. But in this alternate history, they do. And that is what launches us into the Linden Tree, which I don't know if you can see it, but there is to Messerschmitt 264, which was the German attempt, one of the German attempts to build what they call the America bomber. And the idea being there to have a heavy 4-engine bomber that had the legs or the range to actually get to North America and back. And in this particular alternate history, I take one of those that actually existed and called it the Linden Tree, named after the ancestral estate of the commanding officer, who is the main character. He's a Luftwaffe general who is very anti-fascist, anti-Nazi, but being a good Prussian, patriotic German, of course, cheery aye, yes sir, no sir. And as the novel develops, he becomes more and more estranged, if you will, from the governmental, the Nazi hierarchy. And of course, I won't tell you how he actually plays this out. You have to read the book, but that's essentially the scenario.
Okay. So this being alternate history, obviously your knowledge of history only goes so far. At some point, you basically just make it up as you go along.
That's true.
How do you plot it out while being at least somewhat historically accurate so the historians don't look at this and say, that would never happen, you just went completely off the deep end?
Here is where the advantage of being a classic PhD historian, and particularly a military historian of the 20th century world wars. So what I do, and in fact in the Antimony series, which were the 2 previous novels, which were not alternate history, they're more historical fiction. But even in the Linden Tree, I take historical events, personages, circumstances, and weave them into the story. One of the things that has always distressed me is where you take a real person and make them, for example, a beast or a monster or something that they weren't. Or you place them in situations or have them say or do things that the historical person would never have done. And I think that's the historian in me, an author is incumbent, whether it's you're writing a book, a fiction book, or whether you're doing a movie or TV screenplay. If you're going to use an actual person that existed, I think you're morally obligated to have them do and say things that would have been in character. And so I have a lot of historical characters in this book and my other ones, including Winston Churchill, who I admire greatly and who makes an appearance everywhere. But some of the German historical personages like Himmler and Goering, even the Führer makes an appearance here briefly. But I try to make sure that the way I've reflected them is the way we know them historically to have been. The other thing is, I mentioned earlier that the Messerschmitt 264, which was the Messerschmitt's company, their entry into the America bomber program, they actually built 3 prototypes. And I went back and actually found the Messerschmitt company's diagrams of the 264 bomber. And then the graphic artist company that I use then took that and made, as you'll see appearing before the next to the last chapter, it actually shows the diagrams from the Messerschmitt company. So as the reader is going along and say, well, if the pilot goes from this point to that point, all they have to do is look at the diagram and they get a visual image of what the plane looked like and what I'm talking about. So that's, again, part of the historian in me, but that's also making it as close to factual reality as it would have been if this alternate event had occurred in the way it played out. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that, as I say, I credit to being a classically trained professor of history. I'm very cognizant of the historical details.
And you can definitely see where the ripples would go after you chuck that rock into the pond.
Yes. Yeah.
Was it fun to mess with history and play this kind of what if game?
It was. And an interesting background. The storyline here actually dates to 1990. It dates to 1990.
So we come right up to the current times.
Yes, indeed. In the copy room of LSA Incorporated in Arlington, Virginia.
Nice.
It just the idea of what might happen had the Cuba Battalion, the Pearl Harbor Attack Force, what if it had been discovered, and how might that have rippled on? So that idea, as I say, I remember the date, 1990, and I actually wrote a couple of 3 chapters in that 1990-91 period, and then I put it aside, moved on to other things, had 3 kids, and you know how that works. And in fact, Resurrection of Antimony, which was the first novel there, that is not an alternate history. It is historical fiction based on actual events. That dated from 1988. And about 12, 13 years ago, my wife said, get off your expletive deleted and get the thing published. And I did. And so now here we are 3 novels later.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about those ones. So this is part of a 2-part series, the Genesis of Antimony and the Resurrection of Antimony.
Right.
All focusing on the character of Lieutenant John Braithwaite.
Right.
Who is part, I believe, the English military.
He's Royal Navy, yes.
Royal Navy.
Mm-hmm.
He sort of falls into the role of kind of a secret agent. He's
right.
investigating different things. What happens to get him into this role in the first place, and how does he adapt to it?
Exactly. Resurrection of Antimony takes place in World War II, 1941, after he has retired from the Royal Navy, but he's brought back by Royal Naval Intelligence for a very specific mission. And I'll tell you how that one evolved shortly. But that did so well, I said, well, shucks, let's write the prequel. And this actually is the second edition of Resurrection. The first edition came out in 2009. Did okay. I wasn't all that thrilled with the publisher. And then I had an opportunity to get a new publisher who incidentally, is a former executive vice president for sales and marketing of Ingram Books, which a name you'll recognize since they're the world's largest book distributor. So he started his own publishing outfit, and I'm just thrilled with the way they've turned out. So Resurrection of Antimony, and I said, okay, let's do, if I'm going to do a second edition, make a few changes just to make it fit with the prequel, to introduce Braithwaite in the First World War. And so the opening chapter of Genesis of Antimony is he is an officer on board a British Royal Navy destroyer. They're escorting a coal convoy, and a German cruiser is attacking the convoy. And even though they're outgunned seriously, outmanned, they launch off and try to attack the German cruiser. Well, the ship is sunk. He survives, but with a pretty serious wound. And the docs say, you're not going out to sea anytime soon. At that point, because he spent a lot of time in East Africa growing up, his father was a diplomat, and he spoke fluent German, and then Captain Reginald Hall, later Rear Admiral Sir Reginald Hall, who was the Director of Naval Intelligence, grabs him and says, "We've got a job for you, son. You're not going back out to sea anytime soon. We have a job for you." And
Heck of like a job pitch.
Yeah, really.
You want to be a secret agent.
How about that? Well, it's a simple assignment. Just go down to Zanzibar and Dar es Salaam, which was in then German East Africa, and see if you can figure out why this German-like cruiser, the Aachen, is able to evade the Royal Navy, and how she can come out, attack British and Commonwealth shipping, and then escape back into the Rufiji River. Well, interestingly enough, that's based on the SMS Königsberg, which actually did that. A German light cruiser in the first year or so of the war would emerge from the Rufiji River, attack shipping, and actually bombarded Zanzibar at one point, but eventually the Royal Navy caught her. Well, I don't know if I should give this away. There's a reason why.
Spoilers. No spoilers.
There's a reason why the Aachen in this case is able to constantly evade and find these ships and evade. Well, we can probably know that or guess today, but this is 1915, and it's brand new technology. Well, that's his mission, and the resident agent, called it our man in Zanzibar, who may not necessarily be a man. We got to have a love interest here. You know,
of course.
So he works with the resident agent, who I won't give it away, and essentially the novel unfolds from there. The finding out of what it is about the Aachen that allows them to escape.
Now, you mentioned your background. You are a retired U.S. Navy captain.
Right.
You're also a professor and historian at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport.
Right.
That's a heck of a long title there.
I am actually Professor Emeritus.
Wow,
just
very
retired
cool.
in March, and in fact, I can't get back into my old office because it's locked down.
Oh, no!
I was able to escape with enough stuff.
Right, yeah.
But all my books and all my
no.
mementos, including, and you'll appreciate this, including a piece of the copper plating off HMS Victory.
Oh,
It's still sitting in the office.
You're going to get that thing back.
Yeah, I know. Well, a friend of mine who's a former Royal Navy friend for 40 years, the copper plating, they took off Victory when they put her in dry dock to make her public back in the 20s, and it was just being stored in a warehouse there at Royal Naval Station Portsmouth. And so some company called Nauticalis, which is a large antiques, nautical, whatever, they got permission to sell about 250 of these plates. And my friend bought one for me and presented it to me. So I have a piece of HMS Victory.
That's a heck of a friend.
But it's still locked up in the office.
Well,
Yeah.
In the meantime, though, the question to you is, what did you have to learn to write these books? It sounds like you more or less have everything like up here, but did you have to do any more research to help fill in the blanks?
Yeah, quite a bit. And one of the advantages of being a professor at the Naval War College is, you might imagine, a lot of, excuse me, I'm okay, no COVID, but is this time of year is just allergies.
Yeah. I get you.
Yeah, if I start dripping on the table here, that's
dear.
all it is, yeah. And it's not the Andromeda strain or anything.
Hey, good literary reference.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
There you go. Well, one as I was starting to say before I keeled over, one of the great advantages of being at the Naval War College is, as you might imagine, there's a lot of military, naval, nautical history stuff there in the library. But that is the perfect point to tell you how Resurrection of Antimony came about. This is fascinating. You're a lot younger than me, but you may have seen in the 1980s, Time Life Books came out with a whole series of histories, like the aviators, the sailors, the West, the pirates, whatever. Well, their World War II series, in the book that was dedicated to the Battle of the Atlantic, And 1988, and I'm just flipping through this thing, and I come across this chapter called The Zany Saga of the Zamzam. I say, what the... Fill in
It's
the
a
blank.
catchy title.
It is a catchy title. And the Zamzam was an actual ship. She was an Egyptian flag steamer, carried a lot of passengers and freight, and she had started life as a British merchant ship. So she looked a lot like armed cruisers that had been used in First World War and Second World War. And she was sailing, this is March of 41, sailing from New York down to South America, eventually to Cape Town and around Alexandria. Well, she had over 100 Americans on board, mostly missionaries going there. But she also had on board 24 Royal Air Force wives, many of whom recently married and hadn't seen their husbands in a while. They were going to Egypt to be with their RAF pilot husbands. A couple of dozen American volunteer ambulance drivers going to North Africa to drive ambulances for the Free French forces, just like Hemingway did in World War I. Some tobacco buyers from North Carolina, hard-drinking, hard-smoking tobacco buyers, on board this derelict ship with the archetypal Scottish master and chief engineer, the only two Brits on board. Everybody else was a conglomerate of Turks and Lithuanians and whatever. And here they are sailing into the South Atlantic where they're, oh, by the way, German commerce cruisers, particularly the most successful of all, the Atlantis, Raider 16. And you can imagine what happens. And I'm thinking, okay, you got, I don't know if I can use this word, but you know what I mean. Shall we say, probably sexually very energetic young people. You've got missionaries. You've got this whole crew on board this ship sailing into danger. And I will give this away. It was sunk. But it turns out that she was, under British Admiralty orders, not flying a national ensign during the day or running lights at night, which identified her as a combatant, a combatant. And there is speculation that the Admiralty was trying to create another Lusitania. 100-plus Americans on board, sunk by the Germans. The United States is neutral, in an effort to sway the United States towards coming into the war. It didn't work, and only one of the passengers eventually died. The rest of them got back. But the reason why Time Life had this story was on board was then a reporter and a photographer. They were going to cover the war in North Africa. They were on board, and the Germans foolishly let this photographer take a lot of photos. Now, this photographer eventually wound up being the senior editor at Time Life Books, and so I was able to, years and years ago, interview him and his son. But they were eventually repatriated, and in the June 22nd edition of Life magazine appeared this story with photographs of the Zamzam. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, whoa, what a wonderful backdrop. No Hollywood film screenwriter could write a better backdrop for an action-adventure, thriller, espionage adventure. And that was the origins of Resurrection of Antimony.
So cool.
Yeah, and on top of that, with historical fiction, of course, what you do is you invent characters and events and lay them on top of the actual historical events.
What percentage would you say is historical and what percentage is fiction?
What's historical and what's fiction? Well, most of the dialogue is, of course, fiction. Yep. Because your main driving characters, in this case, Braithwaite, he's, as I said, a retired now senior naval officer brought back on active duty. And even when he is conversing with actual historical personages, for example, William Stevenson, who was known as Intrepid, he was the spy master, if you will, for British intelligence in the Western world. So when they're having conversation, it's, of course, all created by me. But the circumstances of, say, Stevenson operating out of Rockefeller Center, New York, the British spy master operating in North America, that would tickle the Germans no end to find that out. But So a lot of that's dialogue. I would say the majority of the major historical events are real, like the sinking of the Zamzam, the passengers being taken to France, and so on and so forth. Almost all the dialogue, of course, and the events that the fictional characters are doing, that's created by the author.
Okay.
So
All right.
there's a balance there.
I'm curious as to what got you into writing in the first place, because as you mentioned, you have a long career both in the Navy and also as a teacher. What made you want to write?
What made me want to write? I think I got that from my dad, who also was an academic. He was a professor and administrator at North Carolina State, but he loved history. And he dragged us to every battlefield park and every museum that there was.
That's an amazing childhood.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
So, in fact, all three of his sons went off to University of North Carolina and majored in history.
Wow.
And I kept on with it. Part of being an historian, of course, you have to do a lot of publishing. I'm working on a new book right now on the War of American Independence. I published in British history, the British Civil Wars, World War I, World War II. But along about somewhere in the mid-'80s, I had all these ideas that just floating around, and I just said, well, let me give it a whirl. And I found out I liked it a lot. I had to write as an historian. The publisher perish is real. But I really enjoy, I think, more doing the creative, the fictional work.
All right. Now, your fourth book takes a very large chronological jump backwards to the Revolutionary War. This is Southern Gambit, Cornwallis, and the British March, and this basically focuses on their strategy and why it failed.
Right.
Break it down to us. Why exactly did it fail? What happened that just made it not work? Because back then, I know the British were legendary for their prowess on the battlefield.
Yeah, and they were. In fact, Lord Cornwallis, other than the siege of Yorktown, which was a siege, not a tactical linear battle, never lost an engagement where he was in direct command.
Wow.
Yeah, a couple of draws like Princeton, but he was quite extraordinary. The problem with the British strategy, one of the things that we really hammer in on at the Naval War College is something Karl von Clausewitz said, that the first order of business, and I'm just paraphrasing, of anyone who is trying to derive a strategy is you've got to know the nature of what you're getting into. And I advocate that if you don't understand the nature of what you're getting into, whether it be a battle, a war, an economic plan, whatever, if you don't understand the nature of it, your chances of crafting a successful strategy are pretty minimal. And so with that in mind, I've always been fascinated growing up in North Carolina. You might imagine that this is kind of the centerpiece of South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, that Southern campaign that ended the war. And I've always been fascinated as not only that, but as a British historian, classically British history, why exactly with all these advantages, did it fail to restore allegiance to the crown? And I argue in the book that essentially one is they didn't really understand the nature of the war. They're going in attempting to win by classic linear battlefield victories and crush the Continental Army, which Cornwallis does very nicely. Does it a couple of 3 times. But that's not the nature of the war. The nature of the war is you've got to win. It's an overused phrase, but it's still valid. The hearts and minds of the public. The assumption was made, which I think is quite true, that the majority of Southerners were in fact loyal, either neutral or loyal. But the assumption was made that as soon as the army shows up, they're going to all show up, if maybe not in arms, but they'll logistically supply, they'll provide intelligence, that sort of thing. And that didn't happen because the Patriots were so successful at intimidating the Loyalists. So here you have Cornwallis thrashing about in the upcountry, winning battle after battle after battle. Meanwhile, his Loyalist allies are diminishing because they're being beaten in these little small skirmishes. For example, there were more skirmishes or battles just in South Carolina than the entire rest of the colonies combined. But many of them were between loyalists and patriots, I mean, American on American. That completely undercut what's known as the loyalist strategy. Another problem is in command and control. And obviously, when you have 3,000 miles away the Secretary of State in charge of the whole thing, Lord Germain, and he's marching off on one strategic direction. Then you have Sir Henry Clinton in New York, the overall commander-in-chief in North America. He has a whole different strategic concept from Cornwallis in the field. So you have this strategic triad, and they're not talking to each other. Or when they do talk to each other, they're not agreeing on any kind of cohesive strategy. So that's the second thing, command and control. And the third thing, which is really part of that command and control, is Cornwallis made a huge mistake by marching inland, because every soldier that he lost through disease, or very few through desertion, but through casualties or whatever, couldn't be replaced. And he could not rely on logistics. That's one of the things that the folks like Francis Marion and Pickens and these guys were great at, is attacking British supply convoys coming up from Charleston and Georgetown into the interior. Well, that meant Cornwallis had to detail many troops just to protect those, so his actual field army was just never sufficient to crush all the opposition. So there were a number of reasons for the strategic incohesion. I wrote, probably back 2006-07, I wrote a 75-page reading that is still being used in the strategy course at the college. And that really was the genesis of the full book, which actually came out in 2019.
Wow.
Yeah.
What war period would you like to write about the most that you have not had the chance to write about yet?
Not had a chance to write about.
Definitely covered a bunch so far.
Yeah. Well, I've done a lot on the British Civil Wars,
sure.
17th century. I've done quite a bit on the War of American Independence. There's an answer to this. I've done a lot.
Figured.
Yeah. I've done a lot on World Wars I and II, not a full-length monograph, but things like journal articles, encyclopedia articles. In fact, I just finished one on the Austro-Hungarian Navy in the First World War, the rise and fall, that's going to be published in December at by the International Journal of Naval History. So a lot of that. The one thing I would like to do, and I'll eventually get to this, is I want to look at 1759, which was a seminal date and I frame it as really the meteoric rise of the British Empire. Because in that year, you had General Wolfe taking Quebec, which was fundamentally important in winning Canada. You had Battle of Quiberon Bay, which pretty much crushed French sea power. You had several events, about 5 or 6 events in that year, 1759, in what we would call here the French and Indian War, but which was more broadly the 7 Years' War. And that really was, I think, the tipping point where the British Empire for the next 200 years just took off in terms of really of domination of the economy, domination of the seas. So I think to answer that question, that would probably be the next one that I'd like to launch into. But I still got some more American Revolution stuff. I would like to do, since I do admire Cornwallis quite a bit, I would like to do the next biography of him. The last one that was done has been, 1970, so at least 50 years. Very good, but I learned long ago in the history game there are 3 reasons to write a book. One, it's never been done before. Well, can't say that. 2, you've discovered brand new primary sources. No, not really, can't say that. Or 3, it's been at least 25 years since the previous one.
There we go.
It's fair game.
Check that old box. There we go.
It's fair game. So
nice.
I would like to continue with looking at Cornwallis and the American Revolution period.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, well, Stan, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been so much fun learning about all these books. But for the folks at home, where do they go to get your books?
Anywhere. They can buy them at Stillwater Books.
That's where we are.
No doubt you're going to line yourself with them. Now, Barnes & Noble, for those folks down on the island, as we say, Quidnick Island, Barnes & Noble in Middletown will carry them on the shelves.
Okay.
You can always special order through any bookstore. I mean, you happy to call up Ingram and say, hey, I need 62 copies of...
maybe just one of each.
Maybe one of each. Or the usual things, Amazon
Gotcha.
or Barnes & Noble.
And print and ebook editions available.
Yeah. Now, Linden Tree is out in, has been for about 2 months now in Kindle edition. And according to the publisher, on the 6th of this month, so what, about 3 or 4 days, this will be available. Now, I know that's not strictly true because there's one right there. And I got my copies about 6 weeks ago, so I know they've been printed for a while.
Okay.
But that's what Amazon says. And so you can either pre-order or if you order now, it'll go ahead and go out to you. So it's all the usual sources. Also, here's that crass marketing pitch. If anybody locally, and I've done this with all my books, if anybody would like a signed copy, let me know. And in fact, I just mailed back to an old friend in Virginia, who, by the way, was the guy standing next to me in the copy room at LSA Incorporated in Arlington, Virginia, and said, Rolf, I've got an idea for a book. He just sent to me all 3 of the novels. I signed them and mailed them back to him.
Nice.
So I am, if anybody would like, I am willing to sign for you. I also, until the COVID hit, did an awful lot of library talks at North Kingstown, South Kingstown, Warwick Public Library, Coventry. And if anybody's interested in coming here to hear me speak on these various military history things, I always have the books there, and I always sell them and sign them. I don't know when that's going to start up again. I think unlikely this year. But I'm supposed to be talking about World War II in the Pacific and World War II in the Atlantic theaters coming up in South Kingstown Public Library and North Kingstown Public Library starting in January. So if you're interested, you can come hear me speak in these 4-part lecture series and get a copy of the book, and I have pen in hand.
Excellent.
And my standing joke is make sure that you pass it down in your family to previous or following generations, because in 100 years, it'll be priceless.
Exactly.
Why? Because it's so rare.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
okay. You got to have a punchline.
Exactly. Well, Stan, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for the folks, definitely tune in every Friday around 6 p.m. We will be here at Stillwater Books through October, November, and then December 5th, the big day, the Rhode Island Author Expo in virtual format, emceed by yours truly. We'll have forums, we'll have author meetups, a whole lot more. Keep it here, and we'll see you soon.
Picture this. You finished your first book and nailed it. The plot, the characters, all the twists and turns. This one's a winner, and all you need is the right cover. If you've got my art skills, this is the part where panic usually sets in. Enter the cover villain, hero to writers everywhere. Founded by noted author Remy Flagg, Cover Villain focuses on composite image covers for science fiction and fantasy writers. Give them the details, and they'll craft a cover using popular trends that everyone will want to see. But wait, you say, I've got ideas of my own. No problem, as Cover Villain loves a good collaboration. As they say, our goal is to put a little villain in every cover we make. Want to know more? Then head to covervillain.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
So for today's interview, we are once again following strict guidelines. We had our masks on the entire time. We're about a good 6 feet apart. And as soon as we're done, the masks go back on. So I am talking to author Barbara Ann Whitman. She is the author of the book Have Mercy, and her work has been featured in a number of Rhode Island Author Association anthologies. That's a mouthful and a half, wasn't it? Barbara, first off, thank you for joining me. It's great to have you here, and I want to dive right into this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So this book, Have Mercy, is your debut novel.
It
This
is.
is your first book. You published it in 2018, I believe.
Correct.
And this really touches a lot on your personal life because it deals with a woman named Mercy, who is kind of in the foster system. Her sister Lily comes back in her path. Things go as you might expect. But what part of your life kind of fed the book story?
Well, I spent 23 years as a child abuse and neglect investigator for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so I've got a lot of experience with young people like Mercy and like her sister and families like them. So a lot of people ask me if it's a true story. It is not, because of confidentiality, obviously. I can't write someone's story. She's kind of a composite of a lot of different young people that I met and situations that I experienced during my career with DCF.
Okay, all right. So walk us through Mercy's story. What exactly happens? What's her conflict in this book?
Okay. Well, when the story opens, Mercy's 18. She's still in state custody. She is living in an independent living program where she's kind of learning the skills that she needs to be on her own someday. She has no family support. She has no family in her life. She's kind of working a part-time job and just trying to wait till she can get to the point that she's on her own. She's the kid that kind of doesn't get into a lot of trouble. She stays under the radar. Her story gets told a little bit through flashbacks. Things will happen, and she'll remember things that happened when she was younger. Her sister Lily, who's a little bit younger than her, is a runaway. She's the complete opposite of Mercy in terms of how she reacts to the trauma of their childhood. She's on the streets. She's a substance abuser. She's kind of a runaway kid. And Mercy worries about her and wishes for her to come back. And when she does come back, she comes back, gives birth to a premature baby with some drug issues, and then she disappears again. So Mercy's left now with her life turned upside down, and she's got this baby in her life who she's related to, that's the family she always wished she had, and now she's got some pretty tough decisions to make, and she's got to grow up pretty fast to kind of reach her goals.
All right, I don't want to give any spoilers away, okay?
Right.
We're a no-spoiler kind of program. But Mercy, is she the type of person who can handle being a parent?
Well, she makes a lot of mistakes along the way.
Okay.
You know, she makes a lot of blunders. It's not a smooth road for her because she's not equipped to do it. She's got nobody to fall back on. She's got to learn who she can trust and who she can help, and that's a really hard thing to do when you're 18 and you haven't had anybody that you could trust for your whole life. So she makes a lot of mistakes. She screws up and she takes a lot of steps backwards. And she learns that there are people you can trust where she didn't expect them to be. And she does a lot of maturing during that process.
Okay. You mentioned that this is sort of a composite of some of your casework as a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know kids like Mercy and Lily?
Oh, many of them.
Oh, geez, really?
Yeah, many. Yeah, I've got so much experience with families like them. The job that I had more recently was with a little nonprofit here in Rhode Island called Foster Forward, and that role I worked with older kids in foster care who were about to age out, who did not have family support, as well as young people who have just aged out of foster care that have nowhere to go. Kids that are homeless, that are living on the streets, that are just looking for someone to help them out. And one of the most rewarding jobs I did there was that I did family searching, and I helped reconnect kids with family and friends from their past and kind of build that support system for them and get their legs back under them so that they can live an independent life.
Okay. Tell me about some of the obstacles Mercy deals with once a child comes into her life and she's forced to say, okay, I guess this is my kid now.
Yeah, I mean, she's got to make a decision whether she's going to try to pursue being in this child's life, whether she wants to be a caretaker for this life, or whether she's just going to go her own way and leave the child, you know, to grow up in the system like she did and like her sister did. So the social worker, it takes her to see the baby in the hospital, and she kind of freaks out because she's so overwhelmed with seeing this little tiny immature baby that's hooked up to wires and can't breathe on its own. And then she finds out that her sister's gone again. Her sister has hit the streets again, and she kind of loses it, and she kind of takes off and makes some bad decisions, and she winds up in jail for the night, which is a really pivotal point for her because she's thinking about her mother and about her own childhood and how she's at a crossroads where she can either repeat those patterns or she can try to find a better path.
Okay. How much does Mercy age from her experience? How much does she kind of grow up over the course of the book?
The book starts out when she's 18. It probably goes maybe about a year in terms of chronological time.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of emotional and mental development, there's probably a lot more than a year that happens for Mercy.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
I so want to ask what happens. I so want to ask what happens, but I
You
can't.
have to read the book.
I can't. Okay. So instead, I'm going to ask about Lily. Is she like a villain in the story, or is she another
She
victim?
is, and I kind of felt guilty writing it because, she is kind of the bad guy in this book. And I'm actually working on a second book that tells the same story, but from Lily's point of view.
Oh, cool.
Because she's clearly a victim as well.
Mm-hmm.
She's a child that grew up without a parent and without a good support system, and her reaction to it was just very different than her sister's.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know anything about families, if you've got children or if you are a child that has siblings, you know that kids often develop very different ways of dealing with things and very different personalities, and they kind of are polar opposites. So even though Lily's kind of the bad guy in this book, she kind of makes Mercy's life pretty difficult. But her life has not exactly been a bed of roses either.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe I'll tell the story from Lily's point of view and kind of make it up to her instead of making her the villain, so that people can better understand her, give her a little more depth and backstory.
Definitely. I agree with that. Because she seems almost like she's sort of a kind of villain, but also kind of a victim, because, she's made her calls, but
Right.
life put her kind of in that situation.
Yeah.
Have any of your colleagues had the chance to read your book? I'm curious if you got any feedback from other pros in the field.
Mm-hmm. I did, and I had some people that I used to work with that read it. I had some people that work in the field, not directly with me, that have read it. I did some book promotions and did some speaking, and I had a couple of really interesting groups where there were people in the audience that were social workers, that were CPS investigators, that were foster parents. And a lot of those discussions ended up being more about those topics than about my book, which is fine with me because they're important topics and, my book relates to them. But we had some really good discussions around that. And the feedback that was important to me was that they felt it was realistic. And I tried really hard to keep it real, because I've got the experience to keep it real. I know what goes on. And I had a couple of friends read my manuscript before I published it, one of whom was a young man who grew up in foster care and is very successful now, and the other is a friend of mine who's an ICU nurse, and a lot of my book takes place in the ICU because of the baby. So the feedback that I got that said that it was real and that it was realistic was important to me, because that was one of my goals. I think we've all watched TV shows or Law and Order, and we see how the social workers are portrayed. And I just, I get very angry when I watch that stuff. So, there's good social workers and there's bad social workers. I feel like Mike Pence. And, my book portrays both of those.
You mentioned how social workers are portrayed in other TV shows and movies. Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest mistakes that get made?
I think they usually portrayed to be kind of the bad guy. They always seem to be overworked, disorganized. They've always dropped the ball. It's always their fault that some kid is lost or messed up, and someone else has to always come in and save the child. It's never the social worker that saves the child. And obviously they are overworked. The caseloads are ridiculous. It's a ridiculous setup for them to do the job that they do with a lack of services that are available to them. But they also do a lot of really good work and a lot of hard work.
Oh, yeah.
And they make a lot of personal sacrifices to do it.
What kept you in the field for so long? So I think prior to the interview, you mentioned you worked there for a number of years.
Yeah, I was at DCF for 23 years.
Wow.
Because it's a really good job. There's a lot of things about the job that are really hard, and the public's perception, I think, is that things about the job are the clients and the caseload, and it's not that at all. We expect the families to be difficult. That's why they're involved. We've got the skills to deal with that. That's what we like to do. It's more the volume of work, the lack of support for the work,
Mm-hmm.
The bad reports that come out in the media that people stereotype, and we think we have to pay for that every time we knock on someone's door. They've seen some horror story in the movie, or on television, or in the news, and they think that's who we are. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that are frustrating, I think, to have the public not understand. We expect the families to be hard. That's not what burns social workers out.
Okay. What does burn them out? Is it just how like they are seen by the public, or is it just the workload?
I think it's the workload. I mean, I think it's just the sheer never-ending volume of work. There are so many cases, and they get more complicated all the time. Mm-hmm. Like there's not usually a family or a case that has one issue. There's always 2 or 3 issues. If there's domestic violence, there's also substance abuse. If there's criminal activity, there's mental health issues. I mean, it's just never one thing that you can go in and fix. It's always multiple layers of things. There's always too many families. The court system is backed up. There's not enough foster parents. There's not enough services. Those things, I think, are what make social workers really question their decision to become social workers.
And yet the work they do is so important. You think that there would be a better system in place, given that they're so vital that you literally save lives.
Yeah, they do. And I think most of them do it because of the personal satisfaction and because they realize that it's an important job. I mean, some people are happy making widgets and some people are not. And I think most people that last at social work are people that want to do a job that matters, that makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to ask about the cover for this.
Sure.
Because this is an amazing cover.
Thank you.
It's powerful. It's definitely emotional. Mm-hmm. It almost looks a little spooky.
Yeah.
But what went into the cover design?
Well, my first thought on the cover is either to have something that kind of depicted the whole story or to have something that depicted a pivotal scene in the story. So this particular is a pivotal scene. It's actually the one I mentioned earlier where she runs out of the hospital and she makes some bad decisions, but she winds up in a playground at night, on the swings. Mm-hmm. So I thought that would make a nice cover. And, luckily the publishers here at Stillwater hooked me up to a great cover artist. I spent a lot of time online looking at covers I liked and what I didn't like, and I kind of described what I wanted, and the artist sent me 2 or 3, and they were all great, and this is the one I chose.
Yeah. I mean, just the cover alone makes you want to read the book, and I think that's usually the case for me. Like a cover will either make me want to pick it up and read it, or I'll say, nah, pass, move along.
Right. And a lot of people think, you can't judge a book by a cover, and they think the cover's not important. But I think it is, because if I go to the library or a bookstore and I'm looking for a book to read, the cover is what's going to get my attention.
I think it's vital.
It definitely is. And I've had other people be very insightful, like interpret my cover and say, well, it represents innocence, and, they've seen a deeper meaning in it, and, I was just picking a pivotal scene from the book. But
I can see that, though. I mean, you have, like, the empty swing set. It's an old swing set,
Mm-hmm.
It kind of, like, harkens back to the older days.
Yep.
The fact that I think this is an empty swing set.
Yeah, it's nighttime.
Exactly. It's kind of like, something happened here.
Yeah.
You just kind of think that.
Thank you, because I was very pleased with it.
Nice. Now, this is your debut book.
It is.
What made you want to write it? And as a follow-up question, was it hard to say, okay, off to the publisher, no more ifs?
Yeah. I've always wanted to write a book. My whole adult life, I've said I'm going to write a book because I've always been a writer. But I'm a procrastinator. So
it's very honest of you. I like that.
I spent a very long time saying I'm going to write a book, but I really didn't know how to go about it, and I didn't really know what I was going to write. But my local library started a monthly fiction writers support group, and I joined, and it was a blessing because I just made a vow to myself that I was going to write a chapter a month. And at the end of the year, I had 11 chapters, so I did pretty good. I knew I had to write. A lot of times I was writing it that afternoon of the meeting because I knew I couldn't go to the meeting without having something written. But after I got a year or so into it, I just kind of hit my stride. I figured out where the book was going, and I finished it up pretty quickly after that. So that was a lifesaver for me. The publishing piece, I tried the traditional route of publishing. It's really, really difficult. You have to send it off. They don't want you to send it to anybody else. They won't tell you if they're going to publish or not. They tell you to wait 4 months. Everybody wants something different. Some want a chapter, some want the whole book, some want a cover letter that says X, Y, and Z, some want one that says A, B, and C. Mm-hmm. I actually got a rejection letter from a company 2 years after I sent my book to them.
Did you have to like think, who's this from? Did I actually send this to them?
Right. So at one point, I put the manuscript on the shelf and I said, I don't care. I just want to write. And it was taking me away from writing, so I was spending all my time trying to publish it.
Sure.
So I put it on a shelf, and a little while later, I decided I was going to write again, and I was just having such a hard time getting motivated. And I realized that I had unfinished business. Mercy was calling to me. Like, I had that manuscript that I had to get it published before I could write anything else.
Yeah.
So luckily, I found Stephen Dawn here at Stillwater's, and it was a much better experience.
What made that work over the other companies?
The other companies were kind of ghosts, like you couldn't contact them. They didn't give you any feedback. You just had to send your manuscript off and then wait. Dawn and Steve are local. You know, I know where they live. Their phone number.
That helps too.
Not that I had to stalk them because they were great, but they were just there for me, and I could work with them one-on-one, and it just was a much smoother ride.
Okay, all right. Now, you've also had your work featured in a number of the anthologies. Tell us a bit about some of the stories you have in those.
Okay. Yep, we've had several Rhode Island anthologies. We have such a good resource in this little state with so many great authors. And we've published 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anthologies, which have a little bit of everything, and then they all have a theme or a title, and Rhode Island authors can submit, and I was very lucky to be accepted in all 5 of them. And I like to think outside the box a little bit, like a lot of people write. If you write science fiction, that's kind of what you write, or if you write memoirs, that's what you write. Some people write poetry. Like once you publish one thing, that's your thing. But I like the challenge of trying to write something a little different. So I've published poetry, I've published a short story, I've published a children's story. So I like to stretch it a little bit.
If you had to jump genres, what do you think you would jump to?
When I started writing Have Mercy, I wrote like the little introduction or an outline at like my first writers group, and everybody said that would make a great young adult novel. And I thought, I don't want to write a young adult novel. Like, I wanted to write an adult fiction book. So after I thought about it, I thought the story and the message in Have Mercy is so important for young people, because kids like Mercy and Lily are in every school in every community, and people don't know what their story is or how difficult it is, what their challenges are. So I kind of ended up buying into the whole young adult thing, thinking this is a great message. But my goal was to write a crossover novel that adults would also enjoy. And actually, more adults have written reviews on Amazon and have read my book than young adults have. So I think I was successful in doing that.
When you first began to get reviews, were you nervous? Like, oh man, are they going to like it or not like it?
Yeah, you get to be a little bit thick-skinned, I think, to, hear what's out there, but fortunately everyone's been very kind.
That's good.
I've had good reviews.
I figure if you can work in DCF for like 20 plus years,
yeah,
you can handle a couple
I'm not
like
too
1
sensitive.
stars.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned your sequel, which you're working on. Mm-hmm. What other projects do you have in the works?
I've got another book that I'm working on that's probably also going to be a young adult novel about twin sisters. I've always been fascinated with twins, so I've done a lot of research and talked to a lot of friends that either are twins or are raising twins to get some insight about that. It's kind of a slow road because I'm one of those people that sets a goal for myself, and writing a book was one. So now that I've checked that off my list, I write for enjoyment.
Yeah.
So if it becomes work, I kind of put it aside and tackle something else.
Do you ever put a deadline for your work?
I have to have a deadline, otherwise I never get anything done. And that's why this got written, because I had the monthly writers group that I had to have something written to go. So, but I write for pleasure, and I've always promised myself if it becomes work, I'm not going to do it, because I do it because I like it.
Exactly.
It's my escape, it's my therapy, it's what I do to express myself and my creativity. So,
nice. Barbara, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate this. For the folks at home, if you want to learn more about this wonderful writer, and you probably do, you can go to Facebook and look up Barbara Ann with no E, Whitman Author. That's her Facebook page. You can also go to Rhodie Bean, that's RHODIE Bean.com, more info there. And definitely check out riauthorexpo.com for more information on this year's virtual Rhode Island Author Expo.
Hi, this is singer Kate Eppers, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout.
Hey, welcome back, folks. Citywide Blackout. We are once again live at Stillwater Books in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. This is our part of our ongoing series of author interviews for folks who are participating in the upcoming Rhode Island Author Expo, which is happening on December 5th. You go to riauthorexpo.com for more information. This is an entirely virtual one. There's going to be forums. There's going to be author meet and greets. I'll be emceeing the event once again. That should be a really good time. And joining me right now is author David Orsini. I could list the number of books he has, but we only have so much time. So we're going to be focusing on his brand new book, which is called The Weaver of Plots. David, thank you for joining me. It's great to have you on the show.
Well, I appreciate your inviting me, Max, and hello to everyone. I'm glad to be able to be here, and I'm pleased that Max is introducing me. I am a novelist. Primarily, I write literary fiction, and thus far I've written 6 novels and a collection of stories and a novella. The Weaver of Plots is one of my recent novels, and it speaks to the Me Too movement and also to the Time's Up issues, in the sense that it is exploring the life of a woman who is mistreated by a young man, and it also explores her retaliation. And so that the novel does not portray the leading character, Charlotte Scott, as a goody two-shoes. She comes from a wealthy background. She's a student at Brown University, and she has fallen in love obsessively with Noah Blake, who is also a student at Brown. The novel actually opens in 1975 when Charlotte has become a very successful novelist, and she receives a letter from Noah Blake. It's the first time that she has heard from him in 15 years. In the intervening years, there have been many complications. While they were students at Brown, they entered into a relationship that he thought of as casual, though it was intense, and she herself felt, well, he was the man for her. Previously, even at the age of 20, she had had 2 close relationships with young men, neither of whom she loved, but whose company she enjoyed. She's looking to Noah Blake not because she wants his money. She comes from an equally wealthy background. She's just fallen in love with him. He, in turn, is a freewheeling young man, very bright, just as she is, a bright woman. And so that, in a sense, he's using her. And she uses him, too. And so they have a love affair for 2 years while they are students at Brown. Noah has told her from the beginning that their relationship is going to be conditional. It is going to be temporary. They'll hit the high spots, they'll spark their own lives, and they'll have a good time. What happens, though, is that when it comes time for their being graduated, he wants to move on. He's going to be at a graduate school in London, and he expects that she's going to go her own way. But 2 months before they are going to be graduated, she deliberately becomes pregnant. She thinks that will hold him to her. But he's hard-hearted, and so that he tells her to get rid of the baby. But she doesn't want to get rid of the baby because she feels even if temporarily he goes out of her life, that baby will be a bond. She still loves him in her own neurotic and obsessive way. And so that creates further complications, because in 1952, when she's being graduated from Brown, to become pregnant without being married was, at least in New England, a scandal. And so that she doesn't mind. She'll tough it out. If necessary, she'll be in Switzerland and have the baby there. But one of her former boyfriends, Stephen Bennington, who's also well-to-do, feels there might be an adventure in reteaming with her and he knows that she's carrying someone else's baby, but he feels, well, let's see what happens. And so that for 15 years, their relationship seems to be going very well. But then there are going to be other complications. In fact, there are earlier complications, because when Noah leaves her, attempts to leave her, he's going to be staying in the New England and in New York area for the summer months, and that's when he's compelled by his father to become engaged to Olivia Tanner, who like Charlotte, is a debutante and comes from a rich family. The Blakes, Noah's family, and the Tanners, Olivia's family, have already merged their corporation, their steel corporation. And so they would like to solidify that big deal by having the marriage of the daughter and the son from those families. And so that Noah does eventually marry her, but not before a terrifying incident occurs at a summer party where Charlotte is still pregnant, and she commits a certain act that's violent and that actually could be deadly. But there are kickers in the plot, because yes, ultimately Noah does return to Olivia, and Charlotte makes something of a life with Stephen, and also becomes a famous novelist. She has two sons, one by Noah, Adam, and one by Stephen, Ryan. But there are other complications that occur, because later in his life, Noah wants to have a child, and so does Olivia. She has 2 miscarriages. The third time she does have a child, and that child lives for 9 years and then dies of a brain tumor. And Noah is heartsick, and he feels he'll go on, he'll tough it out. He and his wife, Olivia, have a troubled marriage. There have been infidelities on both sides, but they're going to stay with one another. But he's heartsick because he doesn't have a son, an heir, or a daughter, an heir that he really wanted. And then he remembers that Charlotte was pregnant, and he had heard that she had a son named Adam. What happens when finally he does arrange a meeting with Charlotte becomes something devastating to him. And in a sense, it merely intensifies Charlotte's need for vengeance. And her revenge, in a sense, recoils on her eventually. By the end of the novel, we're in 1975, and Adam, the son of Noah and Charlotte, is 22 years old. And it is only at that time that the conflict involving Noah and Charlotte and Adam, who doesn't know anything about Noah's being his father, that's all going to intensify and complicate the issues. The epigraph to my novel comes from St. Augustine, his Confessions, and it reads like this. It says, "I was held fast bound, not with exterior chains or irons, but with my own iron will. The enemy held my will, and of it he made a chain which bound me fast." And that actually applies especially to Charlotte, but also to Noah, because he had made life decisions when he was 22 years old that ultimately will influence the trajectory of the life that he would lead. We leave him and Charlotte and Stephen and Rick, another major character, and Olivia when they're in their mid-40s. And the weaver of plots is, of course, Charlotte, and we see how the plots that she creates actually bring so many complications for persons who are supposedly her friends and for a person that she supposedly loves. And the ending, I hope, will surprise you and maybe even help to clarify your understanding that when we hate, when we seek revenge, sometimes we lose our better self, and also it might be that the aftermath of that just recoils upon us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope everyone took notes because it's all going to be on the test. Kidding. David, the plot for the story certainly is a complicated one. It's a very complex plot, and I love that because he really keeps you guessing. What went into actually crafting the story outline before you even began writing the book?
Well, I think that the seed I had was the image of a young man who thought that he had one father, and then ultimately he finds out that he has another. And he's put in a situation of whether he's going to forgive the father who rejected him and even wanted him not to be born. He's going to be challenged to accept or to reject. But also that son becomes aware of his mother's shortcomings and of her need, even after all these years and after all the suffering that she understands that Noah has gone through, of wanting to make him suffer even more. And she is not a saint. Even at the beginning, she's a sophisticated young woman, very privileged, very spoiled, and yet we do empathize with her to some extent because she loves so intensely and so passionately, and she's willing to, in that relationship with Noah when they're both college students, she's willing to diminish her large capacities, which she has never done before. Even in her previous relationships with men, she has always identified herself as a self-possessed, self-reliant, independent woman. And so that I think that there are parts of the story that connect to what's going on today. And I think that my portrayal of some of the males shows that very often my gender has had a problem with arrogance, with indifference, with irresponsibility. But there are a couple of important young men in the book, and then they eventually become middle-aged, who do take responsibility and who do want to try to create a life with a woman that is equal, collaborative. And so that there's no easy way to interpret human beings. We are all complicated. But I think that Charlotte is telling the story for the most part. The point of view changes in the last section so that we get Stephen Bennington's point of view. That's the young man who is willing to marry Charlotte even though he knows that she's carrying another man's baby. And also there is the point of view of Noah when we see him as a middle-aged man who's heartbroken that his life has been, and he's immensely successful as a corporate executive, but his life has been battered because of all of the disappointments where he and his wife Olivia have not been able to have children, and then they do have a son, and he dotes on him, and the son is just a marvelous young boy, a marvelous boy, who eventually dies of a brain tumor, and so that I think we're grief-stricken with Noah at that point. I think if there's any theme of transformation in the novel, and it is there, I think we see it through Noah, that he does change, and he suffers a great deal. So anyway, the seedbed was first of all that Adam, who doesn't appear in the novel until later. He's the son that Charlotte is carrying at the beginning. I should also mention that when earlier in the novel, when Charlotte learns that Noah is going to marry Olivia, after all, even after all of the manipulations that that Charlotte has attempted to destroy Noah's relationship with Olivia. When she knows that that's going to go through, she does commit what is actually a crime, a violent crime, and there are repercussions. Both families hush up the scandal, and she remains very bitter after that. She's rescued by Stephen and makes a good life with him, but also she has immense success as a novelist, but still there burns in her soul the fact that even though Stephen is her husband and he had been her lover earlier, and another friend, Rick, had been her lover and she remains friends with him, the only man that she really loved, she tells herself, is Noah. And yet there is that love-hate confusion that propels her to do many things that she really shouldn't do. So anyway, meet her, and you might hate her. You might feel, well, she's a strong woman. She's doing what she feels needs to be done. You know, there have been many interesting characters in literature toward whom we feel ambivalent. But if we can feel some empathy toward them, or even some sympathy in spite of some of their wrongdoing, well, that might be a new experience for us too.
Mm-hmm. Would you say Charlotte is a hero or a villain? Because she's doing all the plotting, she's doing all the scheming. Is she a good person or a bad person?
I think that it's hard to. I think that it's hard to say someone is a villain or a good person completely. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're all fallible. I'll call her a fallible human being, mm-hmm. maybe more fallible than some. We have to remember, though, too, in the early sections of the novel, Noah is not a good young man. He's callous, hard-hearted, unsympathetic toward her needs when they were actually lovers for 2 years. And there's little fidelity in him. But it's amazing how we see him changing and suffering. And also, bitterness does live a long, long time in some people. So I think that she's a realistic character, this Charlotte Scott. And so that I don't want to call her a villain, but I'm not certain that you'd absolutely like her. I think some of the women in the audience who themselves have been mistreated will feel, yes, she is a speckled character, but at least she's not a weakling. And she's always striven to identify herself as someone who's not going to be a victim. Even when she's left in the lurch. Remember, this is 1952. Yes, she has the cushion of being from the right family, and they're going to try to hide things and so forth. She doesn't know whether Stephen will marry her. He's the one who offers. She doesn't go to him. She expects to be in Switzerland, have the baby, and then she's going to come back to America, and she'll have the protection of her family, but she's not going to give her baby away. She's going to keep that baby. But as it turns out, Stephen helps her there, but that doesn't complete the complications. Mm-hmm. So that, and I like the question that Max has asked. You might find, after reading the novel, that she is a villain, and so it's open to you. Mm-hmm. And, but I will say one thing. One of the ads for the novel gives a very brief link to what's going on. A woman shoots the lover who has betrayed her. A man rejects his infant son and lives to regret it. A woman's revenge, yoked as it is to her love-hate confusion, makes her its prisoner. These are some of the episodes that propel the weaver of plots. So I hope you'll enjoy it. It's a literary fiction, and there are exciting passages, but you're the one who is the judge. I wrote it, but you are the one who will have to decide whether you like it or whether you feel, well, maybe it's a little too heavy.
Mm-hmm. Well, folks, we have we have a special guest tonight. We actually have a bit of a bonus round here. So David, his twin brother Daniel, has written 3 books of metaphysical poetry, and he'll be joining us in just a minute. So a little extra round for you guys. Of course, both local authors, both part of the upcoming Rhode Island Author Expo.
Yes.
So,
and I did want to say, look up my other books, quaternitybooks.com, and I have written The Woman Who Loved Too Well, The Ghost Lovers, 2 World War II novels that are really intensified by love triangles. I've also written Vanishing by Degrees, which actually is my first crossover teen adult novel, and currently it's being taught at the very well-rated Cranston High School West, and we're going to push it through to other schools around the country. Also, Schemes, Disguises, and Traps, a noir thriller. Anyway, if you'd like, look up my books, Quaternity, Quaternity, books.com. Thank you. And thank you again, Max, and Stillwater Books, Mr. Stephen Porter, for inviting me here.
of course, anytime.
No.
All right, folks, we're going to be joined by another writer. Daniel Orsini is joining us right now. And again, of course, if you folks want to learn more about this, you go to riauthorexpo.com. You'll find all the information you need for the upcoming thing happening December 5th. Again, there's going to be meet and greets. There's going to be forums. There's going to be interviews, a whole lot more.
Very good.
Daniel, why don't you take a seat? We'll talk with you, too. Well, Daniel, first off, thank you for joining us. Very on-the-spot interview, but really glad to have you here. Give us a quick outline as to your books and what you write about.
Well, I must say that I am greatly influenced by such poets as Emily Dickinson, William Butler Yeats, Gerard Manley Hopkins, John Donne. I love the poetry of Tennyson because for many years I've taught not only the British novel but also British and American poetry. And so I think that the chief influences would be the metaphysical poetry of John Donne, the great Renaissance poet. And I think that I would pair the 19th century poets, Tennyson and Dickinson, because I think that they were both seekers of the truth, specifically religious truth. Emily Dickinson was not always certain, but then Tennyson was not always certain. But Tennyson wrote In Memoriam, which he published in 1850, and of course there he expresses his faith. It is a sealed faith. I think that the great controversy during the 19th century was the Darwin idea that we derive from the lower species. But Tennyson welcomed that idea and he spiritualized it. Emily Dickinson also speaks of Darwin, and I think that sometimes she is not certain that God exists. But I think that the key poem in the poetry of Emily Dickinson is Behind me dips eternity, before me immortality, myself the term between. And of course, she always ends, or often ends ambiguously, even in Because I Could Not Stop for Death. That is the trek not only to heaven but also to the grave. And she cannot tell you about heaven or about eternity because she has not been there. And I think that Gerard Manley Hopkins is a safe poet because for him, despite the pain, of physical pain, the illness that he experienced during his later life, which was not really a later life, he died at the age of 45, and Emily Dickinson herself died at the age of 55. But at any rate, Hopkins is resolute as far as his religion was concerned. As a matter of fact, he was a convert to Catholicism. And so when you read poems like The Wind Harbor and also Pied Beauty or God's Grandeur, you know that you are in safe company. But then when you read the so-called terrible sonnets, you know that he faced the unknown. He faced the darknesses that sometimes conquer us, that we, in turn, cannot conquer. And so that these are the poets who have influenced me during my tenure in life as a citizen of the cosmos. This is one of the titles of my poems. And another title is A User's Guide to Space-Time. And still another title is On the Care and Feeding of Robots. And I think that each poem poses a problem that has to do not only with religion, but also with science. Because if I speak about religion, I have necessarily to speak about science and the scientific view that we inherit as citizens of the cosmos. And I've made my peace with Darwin. I think that he offers a perspective on humankind that we may not have wanted to welcome, but it is exciting because it is almost as if there is a dichotomy as far as the individual is concerned. There is that part of him that does not want to believe. There's also that part of him that will always believe. And that is the point of the Galactic Pilgrim, the first poem, a book of poems that I wrote, because it is about the search for God. But I think that I call it a search, yet by the time that I wrote my poems, I had already come to certain conclusions about God and about religion. And so I knew that I would write as a religious poet, and yet not without a scientific view. And I think that that tension in the poetry is an aspect of the universality of the poetry that I write, or I should say the currency of the poetry that I write. I could tell you some of the titles which might be indicative of what I do. And in fact, why don't I read from my preface to Galactic Pilgrim? These poems, which examine the spiritual as well as the psychological effects of being a Christian, offer an amalgam of diverse yet related influences. John Donne's Holy Sonnets, Alfred Lord Tennyson's In Memoriam, and Emily Dickinson's Behind Me Dips Eternity. Another significant source may also be apparent: the sonnet sequences of such Renaissance poets as Edmund Spenser, Sir Philip Sidney, and William Shakespeare. I must add, however, that although the poems in this book generate a sense of thematic sequence, and although composed of octets with variable rhyme schemes, they proceed in the same stanzaic form, they are most decidedly not sonnets. Rather, they are, as samples of formal poetry, what I prefer to call either triads, since each poem contains 3 stanzas, or quaternals, a coinage that underscores the role of the reader, not unlike that of the author, as the 4th component, the co-creative entity that responds to and intertwines with each triadic structure. The 3+1 motif, the quaternity, is, as students of Jungian psychology may know, a spontaneous symbol of the self recognized in the figure of the crucified Christ, an archetype of wholeness that surfaces everywhere in Galactic Pilgrim. Not surprisingly, then, these patterns lyrics seek to unfold through form no less than through content a unified and coherent philosophic vision steeped in the model life of the Christian Redeemer. In this regard, I would echo here a creative principle once expressed by Joseph Conrad, a statement of artistic purpose not unrelated to the aim implicit throughout Galactic Pilgrim. My business is to make you see this is all, but that is everything. And the introductory essay is called The Text of Our Faith. And indeed, here are some of the titles in the poems which may indicate my interests and the development of my interests from book to book. In fact, the epigraph at the outset of the poem derives from Matthew. Do you understand all these things? They answered yes. And he replied, then every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household who brings from his storeroom both the new and the old. And of course, there is a second epigraph from Ralph Waldo Emerson, Circles, permanence is but a word of degrees. And here are some of the titles: A Cloud in Slow Motion, Courtship, Crystal, The End of Ourselves, Entwining the Light, Eros Meal, Finite Infinite, God's Folly, God's Semaphore, Hourglass, An Image of an Image, Inmate of Space, Liquid Metal Man, Orpheus Wright, The Path of Least Action, Servant of Nature, The Round Chaos, The Quantum Alice, Spinner, Split-Minded, Trismegistus Odd. So that I think that the content will surprise the reader, because on the surface, the poems are decidedly Christian, but there are all these so-called foreign influences influences that appear to be alien, but I attempt to reconcile the two. In other words, my faith with my interest in science. The second book that I wrote was on the care and feeding of robots, and I think that it is life itself that raises the question about the future, not only of humankind, but also of the robot. And I tend to be of a rather placid and halcyon nature as far as the robot is concerned. I think that I asked a person, a woman whom I have known and that my brother has known for between 40 and 50 years, and a highly religious woman, and I had read an essay that raised the question about the robot and soul. Does a robot possess soul? And one of the writers, the scientific writer, suggested that it is altogether possible that eventually the robot will be soulful. And I asked this woman, my friend, a Christian friend, about the quandary, and she thought that the robot would possess a soul if God permitted it to do so. But at any rate, I also adopt a secular view. The robot can be useful to humankind. Perhaps we can even begin to learn from the robot. But in this collection, I think that I also quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, "A man is a method, a progressive arrangement, a selecting principle, gathering his light to him wherever he goes," which suggests that I am trying to define myself through my poetry, trying to define humankind through my poetry. And I think that it is an ongoing struggle. It is an ongoing experience. And there's also a quote from Galatians, "The only thing that counts is new creation," because we must constantly try to be Christian pilgrims in the sense that we are truth seekers. And I think that the search for truth never ends. And these are the poems of a Christian pilgrim, a mercurial 20th century believer priest who characterizes himself from the outset as a highly problematic nomad. In fact, throughout this book, the elusive speaker becomes an almost dizzying succession, an offspring of chaos, a mote-like matter, a fetus that rises from the earth encoded done, a cyborg, an android, a rabies, a sink shit in the street, a NASA astronaut who contains the cosmos that in turn contains him, and a coherer of the heavenly kingdom. The rabies or rabies is, as a matter of fact, the alchemical hermaphrodite, a symbol of unity. We are not only male, we are also female. We are not only female, we are also male. And I think that all of us seek psychological wholeness. And you know, I did refer to Jung. I should say that in addition to the poets who have influenced me, and I could name novelists like George Eliot or Marianne Evans, for example, or Henry James, it is Carl Jung, because I refer to so many of his poems. Yes, I didn't mention that in my current book, and this is only typical of the kind of book that I write, there are 88 poems, but there are 100 pages of academic notes. So that I suppose that as the teacher in me, I want to know that my students can enter the poem, not altogether easily. I think the poems are fairly complex, but at least I want to be helpful, as a teacher wants to be helpful. And I want to prod the reader in certain directions, in many directions. And I think that the notes are not only useful, they are necessary. I think they are necessary to me because these are poems based in research, and not only in research of other poems or poets, or of English literature per se, but of science, of philosophy. I refer to Kierkegaard in several of the poems, for example. So that I would say that I'm working on a fourth book, The Shape of Things to Come. And I think that we all want to know the shape of things to come, not only politically, but also in terms of the species itself. I think spiritually and morally. And I think that that is the reason, I suppose, that my poems are well ordered. They are metered, they are rhymed. I write academic poetry, It is classical poetry, a traditional poetry. I must confess that I'm not altogether amused by many of the poems that I read in the New Republic or in the New Yorker, because it is only seems to me, a version of prose in search of a style. And so that I think that my poems are, in their own way, an update on traditional poetry. And I think that the update lies in psychology. The update lies in the search for meaning that is never ending. And I think that the search is necessarily, the search in my poems is necessarily peculiar to the 20th century. Or I must suggest to you that I also focus on the NASA astronaut, who becomes a key emblem for me of wholeness, certainly of the galactic search that we all undertake, whether we know it or not. We exist in space, but what does it mean to exist in space? What do we mean by existence? What do we mean by being? And I think that I try to see the astronaut, specifically the NASA astronaut, as he conducts his business on the moon, for example, or in space. And I think you can connect these statements to my interest in a poem like Dickinson's Behind Me Dips Eternity. I think that Dickinson and Emerson, so many of the 19th century writers, were interested in the other world. And I think by the time that we reached the 20th century, we were interested in space, by which we might reach other worlds. But I think the major journey is the interior journey, the interior dialogue with oneself. And maybe that is why I love the poets that I've mentioned, because their poetry is a drama of the interior life. Oh yes, you will find the exterior life in the great nature poetry of Hopkins and Dickinson, and certainly in the love sonnets of John Donne, and certainly in the political philosophy of William Butler Yeats. Perhaps the key short poem of the 20th century is The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And please do not correct me, because I said gyre rather than gyre, because that is how Yeats wanted that word to be pronounced. And he believed that every 2,000 years, one civilization was superseded by another. And he felt that in the 19th century, there would be a new order in the Second Coming. It would be an order steeped in deviltry, steeped in nothingness. That is what he feared. And what rough beast its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. I think that we do not live alone when we read, and when we read deeply, we do not write alone. That is the kind of work that I offer. It is not only my view, but view that I've inherited, and upon which I comment through the various voices that I've already mentioned, and other voices, in addition to the several that I've already cited. I hope that you will read these poems, not necessarily chronologically. Galactic Pilgrim was the first book, On the Care and Feeding of Robots the second, and of course, in some sense, I value a user's guide to space-time most of all, because I think that I'm at peace, and the viewpoint is focused as much on the future as it is on the present. Well, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation and my brother's conversation. I hope that we have not confused you. I am Daniel, and I also believe in the depth of one's name. It is a philosophy of Jung also. One is directed to live out the meaning of his name. And my meaning, or the meaning of Daniel, is God as my judge. And I must confess that the meaning of Orsini is Little Bear. So there you have both the animal and the spirit. And on that facetious note, I will end. I hope that you will enjoy my poems.
Hey everyone, Max Bowen from Citywide Blackout here. Well, it's that time of the year again. In just a few months, the annual Rhode Island Author Expo returns. This event brings together more than 100 authors from all genres. Now, this year will be a lot different, because like so many other events, they decided to cancel the physical one in the interest of public safety. But that doesn't mean the show doesn't happen. In fact, this year it's going all virtual, with panels, author coffee clutches, and a whole lot more. And what's more, I'll be the MC of this wonderful event. Now, the whole thing happens on December 5th, and you should definitely check out riauthorexpo.com for more information and a complete list of events. I'll see you there.